I'm pleased to welcome you to our program, Understanding the Impact of Solitary Confinement and What We Can Do About It. So Scott, our moderator this evening, at the end is with the CA, the Correctional Association, which I guess has been around since 1846. And their job is to visit New York State prisons to monitor the treatment of incarcerated persons. I'd like to have us all welcome Scott, and he'll introduce our panel.
Before I introduce everybody, I ask everyone to just close your eyes for a minute, and we're going to have a brief moment of silence in order to reflect upon the millions of people who are in cages across this country in our prison system, and the scores of thousands of people who are in boxes in isolated confinement, as we are blessed to be able to sit here today and talk with one another. So if we could just have a couple-minute moment of silence. Before people open their eyes, I want you to imagine for a second that you are on your way to a meeting, or you're on your way to visit a relative, and you go in a building, and you go in the elevator, you push the buttons, the elevator doors close, and the elevator starts to go up, and all of a sudden it gets stuck. And you know, a couple minutes pass, you start to get a little frantic, wondering what's happening, is it going to open up again? An hour goes by, you're still stuck in this elevator. This is how many people's kind of worst nightmare. But imagine you're not just in that elevator for an hour, but 3 hours go by, 6 hours, a day, 3 days, a week, a month goes by. People in solitary confinement are stuck in an elevator-sized space without meaningful human contact or programs, basically subjected to that condition day after day after day. We find it could be unbearable to be stuck in that elevator for an hour. Imagine for your entire life. That's the gravity of what we're talking about today, and I wanted us to all be grounded in that reality. Thank you for bearing with me. Folks can open their eyes. Before we even go further, I also want to make sure that we bring some of the voices of people who are in solitary at this moment into the room and into this space. So I want to just read 2 quotes from people who are currently in solitary. And on the back, there's a list of voices from solitary that has a few of these quotes and a few others as well. This gentleman is at Elmira Correctional Facility. He says, "I've experienced time so difficult and felt boredom and loneliness to such a degree that it seemed to be a physical thing inside so thick it felt like it was choking me, trying to squeeze the sanity from my mind, the spirit from my soul, and the life from my body. I've seen mine slipping down the slope of sanity, descending into insanity, and I've been terrified that I would end up like the guys around me that have cracked." This gentleman has spent 26 years in solitary confinement. On a little bit of a more hopeful, potentially, note, I want to read the words of a woman who is incarcerated at Albion Correctional Facility. And she says, "If you want people to pay their debts to society, come out and be better people. You cannot keep beating a dead horse with more and more punishment and shame. As we are all aware, many know and see how counterproductive prison can be. Now, we just need for someone with some common sense who has the power to take action, because most of us are really worth trying to save. Too many lives have been lost or tossed aside in the name of paying for your crime." Let me just read again. "Now, we just need for someone with some common sense who has the power to take action. That's why we're here today. We want to present you with a little bit of information, and we're going to have some time for questions after as well. But mostly, we want to start taking action, even tonight. And so after we have a panel presentation and we have some time for comments and questions from the audience, we're going to break up into some smaller groups, do some practicing of how we might interact with a legislator or a person on the street. And we're going to start to build some movement right here in this room tonight. So I hope that you'll join us in that. So thank you very much for coming. As Linda said, my name is Scott Paltrowitz. I'm fortunate enough to be here today with two incredible people. All the way to the left, Tyrell Muhammad. He's an individual who is a part of the campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement as well. He's a project associate at the Correctional Association. And more than that, he is a mentor, a community leader, an advocate, and an activist who I have the utmost admiration for. So thank you, Muhammad, for being with us. To my immediate left, we have Shaquille Mualim Ak, who I am also honored to be able to be on this panel with. For Shaquille, tonight is actually the first time that he will be speaking to an audience of this nature. But he's a young man, a student, whose father spent a good deal of time in prison and in solitary. And maybe you've heard his name, Mualim Ak, who's a major leader in our campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement. And it's in Five's honor that Shaquille is here and going to talk to us a little bit about what the impact of solitary was for him. So let's all welcome and honor Shaquille for being with us as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Muhammad to give us a bit of an overview of the current situation with regard to solitary in New York State and what the impact of that isolation is on people who are inside. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. Thank you, Linda, for having us and putting on this forum. I'd like to thank All Souls Church for opening its doors also, because it is at the church where much progress is made concerning issues of social justice and injustice. As Scott said, my name is Tyrell Muhammad. I spent 26 years in New York State Corrections. I did 7 years in solitary confinement. Most people, would believe or are led to believe that violent people or violent behavior contribute to most people being in solitary confinement. 4 out of 6 people that's in solitary confinement are there for nonviolent infractions. One of the major infractions that the Department of Corrections use is called disobeying a direct order. Disobeying a direct order consists of talking back to the officer, having more stamps than you're supposed to, an extra blanket, more socks than you're supposed to, not standing for the count. I just heard tonight that a father was locked up because he had a liver problem and he couldn't urinate. And while he was in solitary confinement, he kept getting ticket after ticket for refusing to urinate. See, these are the things that go on in prison. The general public doesn't have an opportunity to look over that wall. So that's why we're here today, so that you can get a peek at actually what goes on. In New York, you have over 100 children, I'm talking about people under 21 in solitary confinement. They're in Green, they're in Comstock, they're in Elmira. You have pregnant women in solitary confinement. You have people with mental health issues in solitary confinement. You have the elderly in solitary confinement. You have the LGBTQ community in solitary confinement. This is a shame. Understand something. In solitary confinement, your mental capacity diminishes. the New York Cities Union came out with a groundbreaking report investigating solitary confinement. And one of the major things that came out in that report, it was about the development or the diminishing of people's cognitive skills. Imagine a 16-year-old in solitary confinement. What happens to him is that his sense of reasoning, his growth and development of making correct decisions and choices are retarded now. So at the age of 25 or 35, he's still behaving at 16 because of his condition being in solitary confinement. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I knew that there was something wrong with me. And I didn't connect being in solitary confinement with my condition until the New York City Union came out their report. And this is what happened to me. When I came home, I couldn't walk a city block by myself. It was like a physical barrier preventing me from going down the street. Every day I would leave the house and go step by step until I was able, it took me 2 weeks to walk a city block. I didn't know what to do with my eyes because inside, staring connotes friend or foe. Out here is irrelevant. So I didn't know what to do with my eyes. And I kept feeling disconnect, but I was determined to move forward in life. But I knew that there was something wrong and I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't tell anybody because the people would have thought I was crazy. And I knew that I wasn't crazy. I knew that I was affected some type of way, but I just didn't know. And there's thousands of men and women who come home that don't know that they're affected. They're walking the streets every day. I tell some of my colleagues, I see people on the train that you might consider a bum, begging for money. I knew him in Attica when he was sane. He came home and the trauma set in. He doesn't know why. We just consider him a bum. But no, the conditions that he was under produced that type of behavior. In the Department of Corrections, you are in solitary confinement by law, by statute, 23 hours a day. Now, that's the law. But sometimes the reality is you're in there 24 hours a day. The reality is you might not get a shower. The reality is, if you're in some places, you have to pray to eat because they will mess with your food and you at the whim and the will of the officers. I wouldn't say all officers bad, but I would say 85% are. To have that job and to torture someone, it's a mindset. Many people really don't get it that your loved one, when they come home, they're not that person that went away. And it takes a lot of patience and love to help them move forward in life. I was blessed to have my family intact. Though they didn't know what I was going through, they didn't know how to help me, but just them being there, being able to have a family support network meant a great deal to me. It is important that we actually join this campaign because you hear the stories about Guantanamo. You hear the stories about what happened in Afghanistan, the torture. But they're torturing people right here in New York. The UN rapporteur who investigates torture around the world said that anyone in solitary confinement over 15 days is consists of torture. I spent 7 years in solitary confinement. There are people there 20 years or more in solitary confinement. If that's not torture, I don't know what is. We have to highlight this issue. It's becoming a mainstream issue today because too many people are being affected, but not really enough of us are fighting where we need to be on the ground to fight. We pray and hope that all of you getting involved. I'm glad that you're here tonight because your support is needed. You will hear from Shaquille about the effects of solitary confinement from a loved one, I will turn it over to Shaquille.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shaquille Mualamak. My father is Fab Mualamak. My father did 5 consecutive years in solitary confinement. It's really a difficult subject to talk about, because solitary confinement not only confines a prisoner and keeps a prisoner in a contained place, but it also locks a family out of their life. So while he's doing solitary confinement, it's like I'm doing the sentence right along with him. There would be times where I would read a book, and we would try to read books at the same time, and my communication was blocked with him. I couldn't communicate with him because his letters, I wouldn't receive them until weeks or months later, and we couldn't really communicate as well because of that. And I would notice sometimes in his handwriting, it was like his mind was slipping away. It was like his mind was slipping away. And I could tell by the way he was writing his words, his fonts, and he was kind of losing himself. Solitary confinement it's really tough. I'm sorry, let me get my thoughts together. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
And this is difficult, because he's speaking about his father and that relationship. And I know it's difficult because I speak to my assistants and them, and it's traumatic for them to tell me about how they felt when I was away, and particularly when I couldn't contact them, and communication got, dropped. I remember, I was so long in solitary confinement when I got out, and you get a chance to talk on the phone, and your family member, you ask about a family member, and everybody get quiet on the other end, because that family member passed away and you didn't know about it. And they don't know how to break the news to you. They don't want to break the news to you while you're in solitary confinement, because they know that might just make you really lose it. So they withhold stuff from you for your sake, but not knowing that, hey, I'm being traumatized more by not knowing. You see, you go 2 years thinking someone's still alive and not knowing that they've been dead 2 years. This is what solitary does. And when we get out here, it's amazing sometimes. Just to talk about the family, it's amazing how your families love you regardless. So we all have loved ones. We all have family. But when you have a family member that's been under these conditions and they can't really express themselves, that makes the family somewhat hesitant, because they want to help, but they don't know how to help. This is why we created this campaign, so that we can empower families, as well as those that were directly affected by solitary confinement. This is why we created legislation, so that we can stop this. There are certain states that's already stopped this. There was a warden in Colorado who put himself in solitary confinement for 20 hours. He tells his story. He was in there only 20 hours. He wanted the experience. He almost lost it. He the warden. And right after that experience, he made a mandate, hey, we got to abolish this here. This has to stop. See, we have to get away from the paradigm of punishment. For over 100 years, that has been the mantra. Punish, punish, punish. And obviously it's not working, because we have a recidivism rate. So we have to rethink what to do with problematic behavior. We have to rethink how we're going to reinvest the money that we put in prison to actually give services and help to those that's there. Because 97% of the people in prison, they return back to the community which they come from. How would you want, these people to come back? Damaged, Or you would like for them to be prosperous? You know, would you like them to be someone that can actually contribute back to the community? To be of what we call doing service and doing duty. That's where I come from. You know, every day I do this, and Scott knows it, I do this at sometimes a detriment of my health, because I be tired. But I know that this needs to be done. People need to know, and they really need to understand that if we don't do something now, the conditions will get worse. Rikers Island, they have a policy where they put people in solitary confinement. And they're children, adolescents. And if you get bailed out, and they get arrested a year later, 2 years later, whatever solitary confinement time you had, you got to start it again. That's crazy. See, this is just vengeful punishment. Adolescents and young people are always going to try the limit or push the limit. This is what youth do. They try to see how far they can go or what they can get away with. We have to understand that. But we have to also understand that we have models, therapeutic models, to address this type of behavior that's successful, that is cost effective. It costs $60,000 to keep one person locked up. $60,000. We know that money could be reinvested elsewhere. We know that we can get some real professionals, you know, at a cost that really can address this problematic behavior. We have too much at stake today. Too much at stake. I want to talk about the bill that we have. It's called the HALT. The HALT means Human Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement. One of the major points of contention in the bill is isolated confinement is inhumane and counterproductive and unsafe. It's counterproductive because you're damaging people. You're not healing. We have to stop putting people in there for over 15 days. That has to be done. We have to create therapeutic models to address problematic behavior. Putting someone in isolation doesn't address the problem. It exacerbates it. We have to create a model where persons that create problems or behavior that will warrant them to be in isolation, that we identify the problem, get the psychiatric treatment that's needed so that they can get better and they can become more humane and whole. We have to stop putting elderly and children and pregnant women in solitary confinement off the top. That's totally inhumane. That's in the HALT bill. Definitely in the HALT bill is not to put anybody in solitary confinement that got mental health issues. But that diminishes their capacity all the way. I remember being in solitary confinement in the 80s, and they used to give you Thorazine and Haldol. And people will be in these cells just rocking like this for weeks, months, and years. So when they got out, they were comatose. That's all they did. They couldn't function. They stopped it after a while, but you stopped it after the fact. You already, destroyed lives. Also in the HALT bill is that we have to stop putting people there for just arbitrary breaking of the rules. We can't have people in there because they got 60 stamps and they're supposed to have 50. Or they got tobacco and they ain't supposed to have tobacco. Or if you got a substance abuse problem and you put in the bikes. If you got a substance abuse problem, you need to have substance abuse treatment. We have treatment out here. I believe if you work somewhere and you have a substance abuse problem, they put you in a program. These things are not rocket science. We have these things in place, but they're not utilized within the facilities. I think we believe the commissioner retired, Commissioner Fisher, he's in agreement that solitary confinement is used too much. But he said that as he's going out the door. You see, when you're in a position to stop it or do something, you're not going to do it. But now you're going out the door and you're going out the door with an agreement that, yeah, you're right. We need to rethink how we use solitary confinement. Bernard Kerr used to be the top cop. If you see him today and hear him speak about prison issues, you wouldn't believe what's coming out of his mouth. He's saying himself that we destroy lives. And this is a man that had a jail name after him. Within also the Hawk bill, we talk about the particularly vulnerable people held in isolation or the box. This is serious. We don't have a person here today, but we have a person that's transgender. And she was put in a box for her protection. Understand, they have a thing called administrative say or keep lock. These are all sophisticated terms for isolation. And while she was in the box, she was repeatedly raped by the correctional officers. Couldn't complain because it's your word against the staff. It was such a horrendous act that on a few occasions I believe she wanted to commit suicide. There are more suicides that occur in the box than the regular general population in prison. People really try to kill themselves because it becomes unbearable. On Rikers Island, the youth, they know one way to get out of the box is by trying to commit suicide. So they play like they're trying to take their lives. And unfortunately, sometimes they actually take their lives. You see the drastic measures people go through to try to get out of solitary confinement? This is something that's really have to be addressed. And I remember, 2 years ago we were here. I believe 2 years ago when we were here and we talked about solitary confinement, me and Jack Beck, we were standing over here, matter of fact. And that really propelled me to get involved in this campaign. Right here, when I was here 2 years ago. Because I heard a story from a woman on the stage. She was in solitary confinement just because she had extra size. I can go on and on about these conditions, but primarily we really want to inform you to get you involved with our campaign, to put you on our listserv so that we can give you more information. The more, I always say, the people can make the man, not an individual, but the people. The more we unite and rally around this issue, we will see the results that we desire. It's already in the media. The New York Times did an op-ed piece about solitary confinement. It was on MSNBC, Daily News. I think we have some conservatives that's talking about solitary confinement. Unlike the allies, but they understand that this has to be rethinked and has to be, addressed. So the more people that get involved, the more demands and pressure we can put on Governor Cuomo and de Blasio, because he controls New York City. The quicker, and immediate response we can get. I'd like to thank all of you once again for coming out, because believe me, you could be somewhere else doing something else. But you're here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Muhammad, and thank you, Shaquille. And in those 2 years, we do have to, first of all, thank All Souls for putting that on a couple of years ago, and again, putting it on tonight.
Yes.
It's forums like this that can help propel a movement, and there has been some movement, as Muhammad alluded to already. There is this campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement. We now have about 600 members statewide, about 40 different organizations across the state, and there's been stuff in the media. Recently, some of you may have heard about the settlement, the stipulation, the interim stipulation in the NYCLU's lawsuit, and if people have questions about that, we can talk about it. De Blasio did hear some of the pressure that people have been putting on from our campaign and another campaign called the Jails Action Coalition, and he's appointed Joseph Pont to be the new Commissioner of Corrections. And Joseph Pont, the thing that he's most known for is dramatically reducing the use of solitary in Maine's correctional system. So there's some hope that maybe he could do something about Rikers Island and the other city jails. So there's movement happening. But we're here to ask you to join in that movement and help push it along, because there's still a long way to go. When we are still locking people in a box for 24 hours a day for months and years at a time, something has gone horribly wrong. And it's just a symptom of our broader system of mass incarceration that's so racially unjust, that is so hyper-punitive, that is so counterproductive, that it's time that we finally recognize that something has to change. And so we're going to open it up for questions and comments. And before we do, I just want to make one more point, which is that on May 5th, we are going to be going to Albany to tell our legislators to pass the Halt Solitary Confinement Act. We would love for all of you to join us. And we have some training scheduled in April. There's information on the back. And part of what we're going to do after we have the question and comments is to practice as if we were going up on May 5th. So thank you all very much. Let's open it up for some questions and comments.
You might want to address, what were some of the five was released, what were some of the factors that helped your dad in his healing? Because obviously he's now, an organizer and all this.
It took a family effort, to help him recuperate from solitary confinement, because when he first came out, his mind was completely scrambled. Like, a lot of things he said didn't really make sense and stuff like that. And he seemed all over the place, and he was jittery. He didn't seem psychologically there, and getting attention and love from his family, from his kids, and my mom and stuff like that, it helped him. It helped him come back and into society, and he got his mind together.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I just didn't want Shaquille to miss his opportunity to talk to us, like his thoughts. I didn't want him to be skipped over entirely. So if he feels ready, I'm just wondering if we can go back to that before we do all the Q&A, so he has a chance to say what he wants.
I remember I remember feeling really hurt inside and neglected from my father, but because he was in solitary and I was really young, I didn't really understand the multitude, of what was going on and stuff like that. And I kind of had to, issues that I was having as a young man, I had to find the answers for myself, you know what I mean? I had to teach myself right from wrong, because my father was absent. He was in a box somewhere, you know what I mean? He wasn't able to communicate with me and help me and guide me through certain life lessons that I had to learn by myself, And that's why I was saying earlier, it's not only that the inmate is doing time, you're doing time too, you know what I mean? That's time that was taken away from my life, where somebody should have been involved and helping me. My mom, she did the best that she could and the most that she could, to help me be a good young man. But I had to teach myself right from wrong, because she could tell me anything, she could teach me as much as she wants, but at the end of the day, it's my decision whether or not to do right or wrong, Not having my father in a man's presence to teach me certain things, it really affected me.
Shaquille, can you talk just a little bit about where your dad was and how far away he was from you?
I'm actually, to be honest, I'm not quite too sure. First he was at Rikers and he was in solitary there.
for a few. I remember getting a whole bunch of letters from different prisons that he was constantly moved around to. And each time he was in different prisons, he was in solitary. He was placed in solitary confinement, you know, and it was hard, you know. It was hard. Sometimes I didn't even know. Like, I would send mail to the other address of the prison that he was at, and I would get a letter, and it would be from a new prison, you know. It was hard as a kid to keep in contact with him.
We'll open it back up, and I believe we had this gentleman here, and we'll go over to Linda there, and then up front here.
I have to say that what William Tyrone had to say is very moving, because what you described, I can't help but think is illegitimate, it's torture, it's immoral, and under international law is illegal, and it has to be stopped. And we're told, during the hunger strike last summer in California, it was justified on the basis of these are the worst of the worst. And what you're bringing to us is actually the humanity of people who are in solitary. And when you look at, Scott was making the point about mass incarceration, well, the solitary confinement, the torture of solitary confinement is very much part of this picture, where a picture is being painted, whole peoples are being criminalized. And what you do to them really doesn't matter. It's justified. And it's part of what's happened down in Florida with the verdicts of George Zimmerman and Michael Dunn, where a target has been put on the back of blacks and Latino youth. Essentially legal decisions that, going back to Dred Scott, black people have no rights that a white person is bound to respect. And we're on a very bad trajectory now. The police have been killing our children, but now any racist bigot who says he feels threatened can kill our children. It's like Carl Dix has said a number of times. It's a slow genocide which can quickly become a fast genocide. And in the face of this, Dr. Cornel West and Carl Dix for the Revolutionary Communist Party, the two co-founders of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, have issued a call for a month of resistance against mass incarceration in October, to change the way millions of people look at this, and to bring many of those people into this struggle to stop it. Not just to protest, but to stop it. And I think quite strongly that this campaign, the organizing, needs to be part of this. Needs to be part of going out to millions of people to actually stop this. And you know, within this campaign we have different views. I myself think it's going to take revolution, nothing less, because the oppression of black people is built into the foundations of this country, and they have no future for our children, whether they're black or Latino, except killing them or putting them in prison, and they're carrying that out. But whatever your views are, there's going to be a meeting on April 3rd, a strategizing meeting here in New York, to flesh out this vision of a month of resistance, major demonstrations, concerts, of ads in the papers by statements of conscience. And I want to invite people from the campaign to come to that meeting, to be part of fleshing out a vision of how we're actually going to bring millions of people into this movement to stop it. And I'll be happy to talk to you.
I was curious, that, when you were a child, did you go with your mother, did your siblings go with your mother to the prison to see your father? Were you allowed to see your father?
Well, in Rikers Island, we weren't allowed to see him, and that was the only time that he was remotely close to us. After that, he got moved way up north, and he was being constantly taken up farther and farther away. So we didn't get a chance to see him before he got moved from Rikers.
Hand there, and then back.
Yeah, I just wanted to know when this sort of pervasive use of solitary confinement began. I mean, maybe I just was not aware, but I recall when I was younger, it seemed like they had education for people in prison. I mean, I know there always was solitary, but I did, like I said, maybe I wasn't aware of it. I didn't realize that it was for you know, exercising or stupid little things like that. Was it part of the Giuliani administration? I mean, when did this really take hold? Do you
It was
know?
always in effect.
So we just didn't know, people just
Again,
didn't know about it.
you wouldn't know about it because you're the general public.
Okay,
See,
that's-
and they don't, you're not going to get it on the nightly news.
Right.
You're not going to get it like that. You have to actually either go visit someone who tell you, or like myself, who's actually bringing this information to you. And we know most of the general public is naive. We do. I tell a story again. There's a program that was called Oz. I think it came on HBO.
I remember, yeah.
And I was at a facility that didn't have cable, so my family members would tell me about this program. And this is how they would tell me: "Oh, you got to see this program. They talking about prison. Oh, it's real. It's real. It's real." So I get transferred to a medium and get a chance to see it. And I look at the program and I see that they highlight the worst incidents as everyday occurrences. So when I contact my family, I'm like saying, "Oh, that's not real." I said, they had a program on there where the guy, he was the imam of the Muslim population. He refused to leave prison. He had an opportunity to leave. I said, that's definitely not real. Anybody wants to get out, and they're getting out. And they're arguing with me. And I had to settle the argument by hell. Hold on. I live this experience each and every day. You're going to tell me what's real? But we understand the media plays a large part in telling us what's real and what's not. So we won't be informed. We have to rely on the media. We won't. Today, now, some of the media are actually coming on board. But that's for a whole different reason. That's because we, the people, are demanding.
Be like lockup on it.
Yeah, we're demanding now actual facts concerning solitary confinement, mass incarceration. The people are rallying around this cause. So the media have to acquiesce to that.
I can just add a couple of words related to that. Is really the rise of the use of solitary tracked the rise of mass incarceration more generally. So initially, solitary was used. It was actually put forward by Quakers in the 1800s to say this could be an alternative way that people could repent, could speak with their creator, could reform and repent. And if you had people in silence, almost like meditation. But what they found quickly is that people started to lose their minds instead. And very quickly, the Quakers renounced the practice, and even the Supreme Court of the United States in the late 1800s denounced the practice. And it kind of went out of practice at that time. But with the rise in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s of the entire, and I don't want to go into the whole history of how mass incarceration has come to be, but it followed that same track. And a little part of that is that, in part, solitary arose, just as mass incarceration arose, as a response to people who were politically active in Black liberation struggles, in the Black Panther Party and other liberation struggles around the country, and that a lot of people, even today, are in solitary for their political views or their political actions. That's one thing we didn't talk about yet. But it's not just for talking back to an officer. It can be for providing legal assistance to other people who are incarcerated. It can be speaking up and filing your own lawsuits and filing grievances. And people are often targeted and sent into solitary with false tickets or frivolous tickets because of their political activities. And so we have to recognize that solitary grew up as we started caging millions of people. We started putting lots of those people into boxes as well.
Well, just one thing on media. It's true that between Michelle Alexander and Angela Davis and the whole movement that spread, that the media is a little more attuned. But today I was listening to WNYC, and they had the youth who were in solitary in Iran, the mountain climbers, on speaking really against solitary confinement, quoting the UN, and anything more than 15 days is torture by international law, etc., which was, I thought, great. Can the folks here now hook in with them and they become, all together, so that it's not like, oh, here's these middle-class white kids who accidentally or not got caught up in Iran, you know, like, let's make the issue of solitary really central and let's have them. So I don't know if anybody's trying to figure out a partnership or how that could work, because I thought they seemed very committed to ending solitary.
They were actually working for solitary, you know.
In what state are they?
No, are we talking about the same thing, the people from Iran?
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually said that one of them wrote an article about it. When he came back, he actually went to look at some of the prisons. And so both of them, a number of them have gotten involved in this issue. I think they're doing some kind of theater performance. And I know they're actually, tonight they're at Barnes and Noble. I mean, it's too bad because it's really is related. You know, they actually thought the prison conditions here were worse than what they experienced, that they were treated better by the Iranians. At least they had light. Their new book is called something like a sliver of light or something like that, a sliver of light. And the fact that none of these people even had light. So,
I just had a very simple question. How does a person get out of solitary, or are you doomed? I mean, you've said you were in for 7 years. Did you eventually get to join the rest of the prison population, or is somebody marked, as you were talking about, your father was always in solitary each place he went? Maybe somebody was saying that. Is somebody marked as
this is how you get out of solitary. You almost have to be a pacifist. You know, you have to accept so much abuse. They want to break your human spirit. When I got out of solitary, it was unique because I was an advocate. And they said, well, you've been in solitary a long time, and we got this experimental program. We want you to take the GED test. If you take the GED test, we'll cut your time. So I immediately, because I read everything in the Bible, National Geographic, Fortune, New York Newsweek, Basketball Digest, old newspapers, all kinds of books. And when I took the test, I passed the test. I was shocked, to tell you the truth. And I scored pretty high. So when I got out and I got in Attica, I'm inspired. So I said, let me take an independent study course. Because I didn't know if I was ready for college courses or not. And I took an independent study course and did pretty well. And then I did so well that one of the counselors, they sent me to Auburn where they had Syracuse University. And I enrolled in Syracuse University. Did pretty well there too. You see, I started finding out about myself. But that was the unique way I got out. You see, because I said, well, let me challenge myself. But not everybody is able to do that. They took in college away.
Yes, right.
And we try to get it back. So at this day and time, you really have to take a lot. Really, you have to take a lot. And I commend some of these men and women who have to endure that just to get out. You see, and this is why you have psychological problems, because you take a lot. You have to swallow a lot. And then when you get out and you're still bitter, you're gritting, you say, man, I had to endure this inhumane. They try to take my dignity. But all right, I'm out. So there's some things you have to go through.
You had access to libraries when you
They will bring you, look, I was reading National Geographic from 1930. Okay? I learned about the National Geographic Society from reading them old National Geographic. They would bring you Reader Digests from 1940. And I would read them. Reader Digests have every synopsis of a book in there. I would read them. They would bring me a New York Times from 1968. I'm reading it. See, it didn't matter to me because I was trying to keep my mind lucid. See, that's what they call a library. You're not going to get nothing current. Nothing current. It's what they have from previous years. But it was all right to me because I had nothing.
I could just also, Noah, just to add to what Muhammad said, I think the first point to say goes back to the question earlier that at the time that Muhammad was inside, he was able to take a GED and that was able to get him out. And then he was able to take college programming, and as he said, that's all gone. And it's part of a hyper-punitive model that we've come to take in, where programs that we know work and are effective are cut, and we just use punishment and vengeance and violence and torture to keep people separate from everybody else. And that has to do with the use of solitary confinement. It has to do with the end of the college programs. It has to do with elderly people being denied over and over again by the parole board. It has to do with the decreasing budgets for medical care for people inside, decreasing budgets for general academic programs inside. We are moving more and more to a hyper-punitive model, and it's time to change. That's one point. The second point is, how do people get out of solitary? Well, some people, it's because their prison sentence has ended. 2,000 people every year are released directly from solitary to the street. The prison says, we can't even allow these individuals to be out in general population in the prison, and yet those individuals are going to be returning home. As Muhammad said, 97% of the people are coming home. So we need to change to say, if people are going to be coming home, let's help to prepare those individuals to return home to help them thrive. Some people die inside of solitary confinement. Some people, their sentence runs out and they're able to go into the general population. In New York State, most of the people who are in solitary confinement are there for alleged disciplinary infractions. In other states, it's more administrative segregation, where you're just given a label and you're called a gang member or something like that. And the only way that those individuals can get out of solitary, my understanding, for instance, in California, is if they basically rat out somebody else and say that somebody else is a gang member, and that is able to let them out. In New York State, there's not that much of this use of administrative segregation. It's more that you get a disciplinary sentence, and if that sentence runs out, you're able to go back to general population. But the problem, which I think is exactly what Muhammad is talking about, is when people are in solitary, they accumulate more tickets, ticket after ticket after ticket. This is the exact indication of why this is so counterproductive, because you're isolating somebody, you're involving them in torture, and then you're expecting their interactions with correction officers or others to somehow miraculously be better. And so people might get an initial sentence for 90 days. And then while they're inside, they get another ticket for an additional 30 days. And then they get another ticket for another 60 days. And then all of a sudden they're in for 5 years or 7 years or 26 years. We'll take last two questions, and then we're going to try to get into the more interactive part.
I'd like to thank you guys for coming out tonight. It's been really eye-opening. I have a lot more sympathetic now to people who are behind bars, and especially in solitary confinement. I'd just like to know, Muhammad, how did you survive? Like, did you have any mental techniques that you used?
Yes, we would call it verbal gymnastics. We would take subject matters and we do pro and con. You know, I would take a subject matter and I'll be arguing against it, and the other guy would be arguing for it. We would play chess by numbers. We would read books and just have conversations about the books that we read. You know, one of the things we used to do is say, we used to call it if you could, you know, if you could get out and you was with someone that had a heart attack, what would you do? See, you know, we would just do anything just to keep our minds lucid. Because if you didn't, you start banging on the walls, you start seeing, you know, paint chips start becoming figurines. You start seeing Abraham Lincoln in the green paint. So you had to do these things. And many people wouldn't participate because they were so in despair for being in there. They would just become introverted and they would just turn in on themselves. They would cut up their wrists, you know, bang on the walls. Some people would try to actually smash their head into the sink, you know, because that's self-hatred. You know, you're in there, there's no one listening to you. You know, you can't really voice your concerns about whatever unjust treatment you're getting. You know, so it's so much. But I, you know, with God on my side and my strong will to survive, that's why I'm here today. See, believe me, you know, I'm not here on my own accord. I knew I had a higher power with me. That was an actual fact for me.
Any final questions or comments?
I already asked, but I was just wondering, if when the prisons became more privatized, did that change? Were there any different from private ownership versus, you know, originally they were just controlled by the state?
It's a great question. The question was, did anything change when prisons were converted from public to private institutions, particularly related to solitary, I guess the question. The first thing to say, in New York State, we actually don't have private prisons. They're all public institutions. So these are actually our public servants. These are our tax dollars. People who are supposedly doing what we are asking them to do, that are inflicting this torture. And private prisons around the country, there are private prisons. It doesn't make up a substantial percentage of the prisons that exist, but it has been growing. And one area where I think your question is particularly apt is related to immigration detention. So we've been talking a lot today about prisons in New York State and jails in New York State, but federal prisons also use solitary confinement, and immigration detention centers where people are there not because they've committed a crime, but because they're from another country. They are also subjected to the use of solitary confinement, and many of the immigration detention centers are private institutions. And actually, some of the companies, the private prison corporations, were, and this is getting a little off, so maybe I shouldn't go there, but we're failing in the late 90s, and we're probably going to go under financially. And they became some of the strongest advocates for harsher immigration laws, getting rid of attempts to make immigration laws more amenable to people being in this country. And then they are the ones awarded the contracts, and that's been able to allow them to continue to thrive as corporations. And the use of solitary is prevalent in those institutions. All right, what I would like to do, if people are up for it, is to break into some smaller groups and to spend a little time practicing how you might convey two things. One, why is this issue so important to you? If you were going to meet with a legislator tomorrow, or you just go home tonight and talk to your family member, what are you going to convey to them of why this issue is so important? And then the second thing is, can you practice some talking points about what is the change we're looking to see in the future? What is the contents of this Halt Solitary Confinement Act?